And we heard the opposition's concerns that we were perhaps behaving in a way that was resembling more the previous government than the kind of approach and tone that we promised throughout the electoral campaign.
Justin Trudeau explaining his change of heart on how the electoral reform process would move forward. How big a move is that, and does it give new energy to something which seemed like it was about to slip into the background? Andrew's here in Toronto tonight. Chantel's in Montreal. Althea is in Ottawa. It's not often you get to do a backflip and at the same time take a shot at your predecessor, but that's what Justin Trudeau managed to do today. Did he manage to move forward this whole discussion of electoral reform in a significant way? Andrew?
Well, they certainly got themselves out of a jam of their own making. This was as shrewd as the earlier move was stupid. In a way, they got outmaneuvered by the NDP. When they first put out this proposal to say that you should have to compose the committee according to the share of the popular vote, I think this was some months ago, I think it was treated almost as a bit of a wingy idea. But by the time the Liberals came around to unveiling their own proposal, I think the logic of it had worked its way into people's minds. That, how do you on the one hand say the present system is illegitimate and yet have a committee based on the same system? So now they've conceded that they must have the support of at least one or the other parties on the committee. It's symbolic. The government doesn't have to take the committee's recommendations, but it sends the right signals when previously they were sending the wrong signals.
Althea, what do you make of it?
I just think this whole thing was not on brand, and I think the Prime Minister's clip really sums it up probably better than I could say it. This move was completely ridiculous. I'm not sure that I agree with Andrew that the NDP's proposal to have sort of the seats on the committee based on the proportional popular vote was a wingy idea at the time. I think that the idea that the Liberals could have a majority on this committee, and that the fact that at the same time they were refusing to say in the Commons that they needed at least one other political party to support them before pushing through electoral change, that coupled with kind of everything else that's been going on with regards to, Motion 6 and the idea of neutering the opposition and government tactics in the House of Commons, to not accepting any amendments at all on C-14, really showed that this was not the sort of open and collaborative government that some Canadians thought they voted for.
Chantel?
I think it goes beyond branding or unbranding and to electoral reform itself. If this government is serious about electoral reform, but also serious about not having a national referendum, and I believe they want to avoid having that, they cannot really give legitimacy to a reform without having one or more opposition parties on side. It's the only way to get off without a referendum. Now, the Conservatives are always going to call for a referendum, and they will to the bitter end. But having possibly NDP or Green Party support at the end for some reform will help fend that off. Now, for the NDP, a good day. They came up with a solution. The government bought into it. But there will come a time where the NDP will have to decide whether it signs off on something the Liberals want, which may not be everything the NDP wants, or forgets electoral reform for a generation. And you know that the NDP and the Green Party have wanted a change in the system. So for today, I think, yes, a step forward for this discussion. It was basically dead on arrival under the proposal of the government. What that told me was that they didn't think through what they were getting into when they set off this process, and almost killed it before it started.
Where are we on the whole idea of a referendum? I agree with you. I don't think the government wants one, and the Prime Minister has certainly made clear a number of times that he doesn't like the idea, but the Minister seemed to open up that possibility again today. Andrew?
Well, they've given themselves some room not to have one. If they had not had some parties other than themselves supporting this, and ideally they'd get all the major parties on side, but we'll see. But if they'd not made some attempt at a cross-party consensus and they had not had a referendum, I think they'd be in a lot of trouble. They can plausibly argue, I don't say necessarily persuasively, but they can at least plausibly argue that if they get bipartisan consensus, they don't have to necessarily go to referendum, or they don't necessarily have to have the referendum before the event. They could have it after the event. There's a lot of possibilities in there, a lot of debates still to be had. But the Conservatives were certainly working up a head of steam on this, and they're going to continue on this because I think they think that a large number of the public would agree with them on this.
What do you think the end result is before 2019? The promise was it'd be different We've seen the last time we'll ever vote the way we did in 2015. Do you think that's still a realistic possibility, Chantal?
Not if the government in the end decides to accept the notion of a plebiscite or a referendum, because Elections Canada needs a lot of lead time, and we've just actually wasted 7 months of inaction on this file. So the government has set itself up again with a tight deadline that it may not meet. It will also need to sell the Senate on this, where again it has very little control. So question mark as to whether it's going to be doable. The referendum thing, by the way, that is easy to say today. Hey, we want a referendum. But then what is the threshold? Does every province need to agree? What if Alberta and Quebec say no and the others say yes? Once you start going down the road of a national referendum in this country, you're opening the door to a lot of other questions.
Althea?
So I want to say two things. One, I think we need to say, commend the Liberals for, I think, doing the right thing on this issue. But we also kind of have to not be naive. The Liberals, in adding as an amendment to this NDP motion, this idea of the committee suggesting how best to consult broadly with Canadians, essentially gave themselves an out. The way the committee makeup is now, the Liberal chair only votes if there's a tie. There's 4 Liberals, there's 3 Conservatives, 2 New Democrats, a Bloc, and a Green member. The Bloc and the Conservatives want a referendum at all costs. The Greens and the New Democrats and the Liberals, but less so, have argued that you don't need a referendum. So the Liberals really get to decide if they like the proposal and the direction in which the committee is going, that they will say we don't need a referendum. And if they don't like the way the committee is going, they can say, oh, we think we need a referendum, and are pretty much guaranteed that the status quo stays. So I think it was pretty ingenious strategy today.
I'm going to totally disagree with that, okay. and hope somehow that the people in the Prime Minister's office are responsible enough to know that calling a referendum on anything sensitive is not a great recipe to get rid of a plan. It's a recipe to buy into other problems, and that is something that I believe that they do know.
Do you want a closing thought on this, Andrew?
Well, they've committed themselves pretty solidly in that platform to that this would be the last election held in the last system. So if they're going to wriggle out of that, something would have to. If it's not going to be a referendum, is it going to be a court challenge? Is it going to be the Senate? Or do they actually proceed with it? And I still would say the most likely scenario is some kind of reform, but we'll see what it is.
All right. Quick round now on Hunter Tutu, which has been a kind of one of the mystery things of this week. We all know he resigned a couple of days ago. Here's how Justin Trudeau handled that the morning after.
As was announced yesterday, Hunter Tutu has left the Liberal caucus and resigned from cabinet to seek treatment for addiction issues. This was his own choice after a very difficult situation.
We do not know what that difficult situation was, whether he was referring to the addiction to something. We don't know what that was. Do we need to know? Is it important that we should know? Althea?
I don't know enough to answer that question. All we have to go on is Mr. Trudeau's previous behavior, with regards to Seamus O'Regan, who admitted that he had an alcohol problem and he was going to check himself into rehab, and the Prime Minister was very supportive of him at the time. Mr. Tutu did not have that level of support this time around. They talk about issues, but they're refusing to tell us what type of addiction he has, if there is anything that happened in his office or with dealing with his cabinet portfolio. We don't know. I assume that if it was, and I'm even hesitant saying it on the air, but, if it was anything criminal related, I assume that we would know that. So, I think there's a fine line about respecting people's privacy, but also not knowing anything. I mean, getting kicked out of caucus or leaving caucus, the bar's been set pretty high with Scott Andrews and Massimo Pichetti 2 years ago with the allegations involving sexual assault or sexual harassment. That's the we just know that it's somewhere in between these two things. That's all we know.
Andrew.
If there's nothing there, they're going out of their way to make it seem like there's something there. Yeah. We don't know a thing at this point. But it's very unusual for somebody to leave caucus merely because of addiction issues. I can understand why you would step down from cabinet while you try to get your life together, but it's not usual for you to have to leave caucus for that. They then compound that by refusing to say whether he'll be admitted back into caucus. Mm-hmm. We get these opaque statements from the Prime Minister. everything would suggest that they're behaving as if they're trying to put as much distance between themselves and him as they possibly can, at which point you start to say, okay, then what's going on here? The people of his constituency elected a Liberal. He's no longer a Liberal. Fine, that's his right. But you usually should level with your constituents as to why this is happening. And just taking in the whole context there, it raises more questions certainly than they've answered.
Chantal?
I agree with all of that. It's not the step away from a cabinet posting. It's happened before. People deal with issues. It's the being out of caucus. And I agree with Andrew. His constituents should be able to know exactly what's happening to their member of parliament. And that is not going into privacy issue. It's going into what's happening. Why would you be not in the caucus anymore? Just because you're dealing with an addiction issue. Others in other caucuses have gone away to rehab and not been out of caucus.
But some people have left caucus to deal with their personal issues. There is precedent for that, just not necessarily in Trudeau's cabinet, in Trudeau's caucus.
But then why not say he'll be welcome back? Why not, why the refusal to answer that question?
Yeah, no, you're right, because that's today, given the opportunity to say that, the Prime Minister wouldn't answer it and wouldn't discuss it any further. We're almost out of time, but we have just enough time to show a very important picture of a news event this week. And there he is.
Okay.
Dr. Andrew Coyne.
You know, you think you can trust people.
It's a great picture. We're all very impressed. It was University of Manitoba. Andrew got his honorary doctorate this week.
All right, let's move on.
Congratulations.
We all send our congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful picture. Nice hat. All right. We thank you all. Althea, good of you to join us this week. Chantal in Montreal and Andrew here in Toronto. By the way, At Issue will not be with us next Thursday. The National will be broadcasting that night from London, where we'll be preparing a number of special shows on the 90th birthday celebrations for the Queen.